Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My mission is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, is doing during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple crises: the global pandemic, Brexit, and of course, the ongoing and accelerating collapsing of capitalism, the state, and the climate through this decade. To do this, I need people like you, dear listener. Most of all, I need people who are in Leeds or who are from Leeds to come on this show and be my guests. So please join me and help me with this mission whenever and however you can. Critically, I will need people like you, dear listener, as financial backers. Please consider supporting or donating to this project. You can do so with a £1 monthly donation via either Patreon or Ko-fi, or you could donate any one-off amount to Working Hours via either Ko-fi or through the LibrePay button on the About page of Western Studios' website. Thank you. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wouldn't say that I actually really had any thoughts about what I wanted to be as I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that sort of like a defining point when I was little would have been when I was about 5 years old. It could have been before that, I'm not sure. When my dad took me to the Williamson Art Gallery, which is a local art gallery and museum to where I used to live on the Wirral. And that place has sort of just stayed with me ever since. I still go back there now whenever I can. And I just remember sort of like the objects of that museum being something that sort of like really captured my imagination. Certain things that I remembered for my entire life. When I got to sort of like time to leave school, noticing what the heck do I do? I went to art college.
Was there a particular work that struck you, or was it just sort of like you walked in? Was it like walking into, the Natural History Museum and seeing the dinosaurs kind of thing, of just like, whoa?
Yeah, it was. I mean, even in the 1970s, it was like walking into a building that was actually the 1900s.
Yeah.
It had that sort of like great sort of ambience about it. There was one object in particular, and it's an object that I focused on in recent years as well. It was the one thing that stood out above everything else to me, and that was an old Victorian polyphon.
Okay.
And I have a distinct memory of it when I was little, and throughout my whole sort of childhood growing up and visiting that gallery time and time again, was that it didn't matter whether it was me putting what at the time was a single penny coin into it, or somebody else doing it whilst you were elsewhere in the building. You would just hear this sort of like whirring and clanking and this penny dropping into the machine as it sort of slowly came to life, and it would start just playing a music box song. So it works just like what do you call them? An actual musical box. It's a metal disc with holes punched in it, and as it rotates, metal forks make this sort of plinky plonky music. And for years I didn't know. I always heard the same song, because I don't think they very often change the disc in it. Apparently there was about 40 discs, but I only ever recall this one song. Many years later, in the mid-90s, I found out that in actual fact, it was I dreamt that I dwelt in marble halls, which was from a Victorian sort of threepenny opera. And just the memory of that, when you're very little and you've sort of sat in a room full of like oversized Rococo style furniture and stuff, and hearing that sort of drifting across it was the most haunting thing I could ever, describe to you. I think. And so in recent years, I went back and did a little bit of a talk for a Thursday night sort of event at the Williamson as a sort of an aid to starting funding to get it repaired, because they'd fallen into disrepair over years. Which happily they've made their money now, and they've actually got the music box repaired.
Cool.
And which made me very happy, because like I say, it's something that I hope people get to sort of like hear for a long time to come. To make an artwork that I did, which I took to America in 2014. I used that as the basis for a sound recording in the piece. So in actual fact, before I learned that it was not working properly, I'd actually managed to record that song from my childhood onto. So I had it permanently. So when it was sent away to be repaired and we didn't have
a copy of it,
we had a copy to use.
Very good. Yeah.
So that was nice. I guess that really is what started the whole thing off for me. I mean, I did a while at art college doing jewelry design and manufacturing. I went away, worked for Sainsbury's for 11 years, where I completely sort of like just got on with doing other things, how it is. And then in 2000 decided to sort of jack in all of that and go back to college and do what I'd never done originally, and that was a degree. So I came to Leeds Metropolitan.
Was it art straight away then? You were like, art. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And did any particular reason you picked Leeds? Did you have any connections to the city? Or
no, I didn't. Leeds as a city had kind of intrigued me when I was younger. A lot of the music scene that I listened to sort of like came from Leeds in the 80s. There was various things, and I suppose, but nothing that I would say sort of especially sort of like conspired to bring me here. But I came, had a look around the universities and stuff, and plugged in the end for Leeds Metropolitan. And now, having done that course all these years later, I graduated in 2003. At the time going into it, it was like, well, am I doing the right thing here? Am I really? You get sort of caught up on, have I made the right decisions here? The course was nothing like I imagined it to be. But that turned out to be a really good thing.
Yeah.
Because now, all these years later, I can't imagine having done a different course, even the course that I'd imagined it to be because of its title at the time. I was like, oh no, this is so much more what I'm interested in here.
So was it, I mean, did the degree, did it kind of pay for itself? Was it the right decision?
Yeah. I mean, it's never paid for itself because, student loans and all that, mine's racking up year by year rather go down because you just can't earn enough money to start paying the thing back. But ultimately, if we sort of talk in terms of sort of achievement or a success in terms of having done things and made things happen, even if it wasn't financially successful, to be able to get that loan paid back. I couldn't imagine doing anything else, and I wouldn't, and I still don't regret doing it now. Money would be nice, but
well, I mean, gone are the days when a degree would lead to sort of higher earnings. So
and yet strangely, that's how it's promoted to us these days, more than it ever was in the past. I think. The whole sort of like, higher earnings for degree people is a completely disingenuous argument. I think if and when people ever become wise to that particular bit of rhetoric, they will realise just how sort of rubbish that is, really.
But I think it's kind of a trap because it's sort of like, oh, well, you need to get a master's then. Oh, well, you need to get your PhD then. So it's like, what? So I need to go into even more debt and do even more work.
Well, it's interesting you say that, actually, because I remember when I was at art college, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and, I did a HND and, they were saying to me, well, you really need to do another year and turn it into a degree. They won't look at you without one degree or whatever. And that was what was being talked about then. 11 years after that, I then sort of like leave my job, my earning job, to go to university and do a degree. And by the end of that 3 years, already everybody around me is talking about their masters. and now I work in an art gallery, where, the talk is always now of PhDs. And so it is this ever sort of like spiraling, cost of education that sort of like determines how, what kind of paid employment you get. And I have to admit to being at that stage in my life where, I'm 50 now. And I don't want to go through any more education now. As far as I'm concerned, my education is it continues in this role that I do now. I'm thankful for the education that I got, and that, I can honestly say both times that I had really good teachers and people who were enthused about the arts and therefore made you want to do it even more.
Yeah. And opened up doors to new ideas and possibilities. And
absolutely. Yeah. But now I'm at that stage where I feel like I've kind of got enough of the practical skills that I want. Just being able to theorize about it anymore, have any bearing on what I would do as a person in the arts. At this point in life, I'm not sure it would. There's always things we can learn through education. But I think at the moment, my main concern is, how do I put what education I've got to the best use that I can, while still using it myself, but trying to sort of pass it on to others at the same time.
You're listening to Series 3, Episode 31, and to my guest, Bruce Davies. This is an in-person interview recorded at Basement Arts on the 2nd of August 2022. You will hear a police siren at some point during this conversation. Hello, loves. Bruce Davies is an artist, writer and curator of Basement Arts Project. His work looks primarily at the relationship between artist, gallery and viewer, how environments can shape the perception and understanding of an artwork, and how a space can alter the nature of the work itself. It has been this line of inquiry, along with 4 years as the organiser, curator, project manager and founder member of the Peripheral Artist Collective, that led to the formation of Basement Arts Project. Bruce is also co-director and a writer for South Leeds Life. As Basement Arts Project, Bruce has developed a programme which has, over the last decade, become embedded in the South Leeds community. He has created an established programme of activities and exhibitions throughout the year at his South Leeds venue. Basement Arts Project participate regularly in external events that have taken many artists' work to Jamestown USA, Sweden, Manchester, London, Liverpool and other venues around Leeds. Basement Arts Project is regularly involved in projects that revolve around community participation, as well as supporting and assisting in the development of artists' work for other purposes. Basement Arts Project is regularly involved in projects that revolve around community participation, as well as supporting and assisting in the development of artists' work for other purposes. To find out more, go to basementartsproject.com. Now, please enjoy this episode of Working Hours with Bruce Davies. What is it that you're doing now?
So, 4 days a week, I work for Henry Moore Institute. I'm the receptionist there, which means I kind of look after the galleries, the staffing, that kind of thing on the ground floor, the sort of the day-to-day dealings.
In front of the house, yeah.
That's 4 days a week. Then my other 3 days of the week, I am Basement Arts Project, which is a project I run here from my house. We started it 11 years ago now, April 2011. And the idea was that we would stage exhibitions of artists' work from whatever their background, as a thing that gave the local community here in Beeston, South Leeds, access to art. Art is something that is not typically accessible to people perhaps of a working class background. I've always been of the opinion that it should be. I myself come from a very much a working class background, and I see that it was only through those people around me when I was very little, sort of giving me the impetus, the sort of the meaning in it to be able to know that that was the direction that I was heading. I think there's a lot out there these days who don't have access to that kind of thing. There's so much talk of art being surplus to requirements. You have to look at the sort of that Times list. I mean, I feel it was a joke anyway, but it does say something about how we view art. The list of most useful and useless jobs in a pandemic. And the number one most useless job in a pandemic, according to this Times survey, was an artist.
Yeah, I would go more for like corporate law or, like some kind of trader, something financial services, or politician.
Yeah, well, yeah. And to be honest as well, I mean, so like thinking about that as a retort, I think it was the third most useful in the other side of the list was supermarket worker. So we obviously had this sort of thing go around, this rhetoric of all of a sudden supermarket work is important to us now. I remember it being sort of like a deeply unsatisfying time dealing with the public when I worked in a supermarket. Not always. I mean, there were some very good people to work with and work for them as well.
But it's the bad times that stick out.
It is. But what also sticks out is the sort of thing of people saying, supermarket worker, you need to go and get a better job than that. You're not much use. That kind of like that kind of thinking has sort of like come back post-pandemic as well, because, we hear so much sort of like criticism of what's perceived by others to be menial work now. It's not. Never is it menial work, because all of these things, and I include artists in this list, provide us with something, even at the worst of times. This idea that, we're stuck in a tunnel in the likes of a pandemic, and there has to be someone sort of tending that light at the end of the tunnel. We're not always going to be in a pandemic. There'll be a point where we come back into a real world, into a real society again. What do you want that society to look like? Imagine that society without its supermarket workers. Well, that wouldn't exist either, shop workers in general. Imagine it without artists. Oh, well, actually, the time that you've just had during this pandemic would have been very different without people in creative industries, whether it's authors, filmmakers, musicians, artists of varying different stripes in the visual arts, all providing people with things that they can still sort of like think about even now at the worst of times, and get something that takes their mind off just how bad things might be right now. So I think they're always very sort of like destructive, all of these lists that.
But they're normally written by people who, who would be self-described as non-creative people. And, like that's that element of them's largely been squashed out. So they're like, no, it's all rubbish.
Well, that is, in itself is like completely disingenuous, because it's like, well, you're writing, aren't you? You're a journalist.
Yeah.
It's a creative industry.
Yeah.
You are part of that. You are still part of the same agenda, really. Because what's the one thing that you want to do during this pandemic? You want to sell newspapers, so you have to be able to write about it. Therefore, thereby using more of your sort of like creative talents to be able to do so. So, I don't think those kind of arguments from them flies, really.
So with Basement Arts then, what does that involve on a kind of regular day basis? Is it largely, are you booking artists and then moving in exhibitions and then moving them out? Are you cycling things quite fast? Does it happen on a kind of casual rotating basis? Like, how does it work?
Yes to all of those things. In short, in slightly more detail, it'd be interesting to know what doing this doesn't involve me during because that'd be a very short list of things. I mean, yes, this is my house, and so I have to live in it with my family, so we're all in this together, kind of thing. It wouldn't happen if everybody in the family didn't want it to happen. And to get it off the ground, yes, it's been 11 years now of sort of fairly meticulous planning cycles of things to happen. I mean, in the first year, we did 4 things. By 2015, we were doing sort of like 10 projects a year. That became a bit too much, but I was working pretty much full time, 5 days a week on it at that point. But then when I had to sort of like my personal sort of funding that I'd been given through charity to do that ran out. I had to return to sort of full-time work and do this again around another job. So, once again, it's sort of like contracted slightly, but not much. Still we're getting 4, 5, 6 projects done per year. And the sort of what those projects involve are extremely sort of like different. I mean, we've done art fairs and exhibitions in other countries, that have taken us to Jamestown in New York, to Stockholm in Sweden, to Dortmund in Germany, Sluice Art Fair in Hackney, Liverpool Biennial, things like that. So we've had a really big sort of like run of things that we've done with other people in other cities. We also have a number of artists who we work with quite regularly, a guy called Kimball Bumstead, who was our first exhibiting artist here in the basement. And then over the course of 10 years, he's worked with us on things elsewhere, projects outside of the basement over the course of the last 11 years. When we got to our 10th anniversary, we couldn't do an actual show because we were locked down.
Yeah.
But Kimball, who did the first show, we brought him back to do a 10th anniversary, literally to the day. So on the 2nd of April, 2021, we were able to do another exhibition with him, but we created a virtual basement online.
Right. Nice.
So we've worked virtually as well. We have a couple of gallery spaces online for particular projects. I'm working on a school project at the moment that will also have a sort of virtual element to it with whatever we make with them. We've just completed a public sculpture project outside here called Jacob's Ladder. That's 9 foot and 7 tons of Tadcaster limestone. And, I even got to work a bit as sort of technician on that with the artist. So to say, what aspects of it do you get involved in? It's like literally every aspect. Yeah. It was really good as well because, I haven't made anything myself for quite a few years now. I'm kind of okay with that. I do get frustrated sometimes that I'd like to, but ultimately just this thing of working
in the area, isn't it? It's like, well, I want to do this, but I'm quite happy that I'm working in this area and I'm contributing towards it. And I'm working in the sector, for want of a better word, but, like the field that you're interested in.
Yeah. And also sort of this thing as well of sort of like looking at what, collective actions can sort of like bring about as well. I mean, the whole thing with Jacob's Ladder was just about taking a piece of land that was sitting unused and getting really unkempt and horrible that literally sits outside this house and doing something with it that turns it into a thing for the community. My whole thing really for art is it's about this thing of promoting it to people as a thing of enjoyment, of education, and maybe even somewhere down the line if things improve employment as well. In doing Jacob's Ladder, raise a bit of money. Hopefully we'll be able to pay a couple of people to do things as part of that. But, we're always looking at ways in which, maybe we can turn this around to become things that people see it as, possibilities for practical employment as well as purely for, enjoyment or educational purposes. It's one of the few things I think that allows people all of those things at once. I just see what I do here now over 10 years as being, if I hadn't been involved on working on these projects with people, some things that other people suggest to me and I go, I'd like to do that. But quite a lot of the time, me just going, right, I've got an idea to do this. Who wants to do this and see, who wants to work with us? I mean, our program here across the year is, kind of 50-50 split if you sort of like looked right across the 10 years between things that we've gone out and said, right, we've got an idea for a project, let's do this. And the other half being people coming to us and going, I've got this idea for a project. And then sort of negotiating with them how we would do it.
I thought of a couple of things through that. So I think, the Jacob's Ladder thing made me think of ownership and space. And, art a lot of the time, especially with like physical art, sculpture, installations and things, they are about taking space and having ownership, and you were talking about access. And in terms of the access, I also wanted to ask, obviously you're providing a way for the community to access artists, but are you also providing a space where the community have access to exhibition?
Yeah, even with the idea of the basement as a thing which people are invited into, even though it's our home, people still are uncomfortable with that sometimes, because they're kind of like, you're inviting me into your house, you don't even know me, into a basement as well, all things. I mean, how weird does that want to look? So, you know, I'm not saying that everybody thinks I'm a serial killer or anything like that. I mean, at first meeting me, but there is still a sort of like a cautiousness towards why anyone would do such a thing.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like a crazy notion to them. And we've always had a fair amount of success with it from the outset.
Uh-huh.
You know, half of our audience, slightly more than half, comes from the art scene. And the art scene is well adjusted to places that are not necessarily places that art is meant to be seen, things that move from one place to another on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So they're used to following around. They know how to find us.
Yeah.
We've always had, though, right back to the very beginning, which I don't quite understand how this has worked, almost half of the audience that are from locally who don't access a lot necessarily, don't understand the ins and outs of the sort of the temporary space art world and things like that. But that is kind of like I wouldn't say a limited audience, because it's always changing. There's always new people from that 40%, and there's always returning visitors from previous things. So it does keep going in that way. But my thinking with Jacob's Ladder was that if we did something that was extremely public, and whilst the public haven't been initially involved in the making of the ladder itself, the main sort of sculpture at the heart of it, there is those other two pieces of rock out there, which we're going to be working with the community on for them to turn into benches for people to sit there on. I mean, people are using the stone for just that now anyway. So even without anything being done to them, what we aimed for works. And so a lot of the problems that space had, you know, of people misusing it, people shooting up drugs on it, all manner of bad behavior. Over the last 4 weeks since we actually got the ladder upright in place. Because I'm going to tempt fate by saying this, but it's whittled down to very, very nominal. Bit of smashed glass one day next to one of the benches. That's been about the height of it, which in comparison to what was on there is absolutely nothing. I can kind of cope with that, but some of the other stuff that I couldn't cope with being on there. And so it has changed it in that respect. And people have been involved, even if not practically to this point, because Jacob's Ladder lay on its back at the edge of the road for a year. The artist was a bit cautious about this. I know about it, you know, how this is going to go down. I was like, come on, just trust me, Keith, let's do this. And he admits now that, yeah, it was a really good thing to do, because half the year that he's worked there on Mondays, quite often with John, his technician, sometimes with me there as well, he's had so many conversations with people, and every single conversation has always been, good luck with it. We really can't wait to see what it looks like when it's finished. And, well, now that it is finished and standing in place, I can safely say that people are appreciating it now that it's finished.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, so they never had a hand in making it, but as he was making it, they were talking to him. Some of them would relate stories of like, I remember when I used to work in a mine just outside Morley, a quarry just outside Morley. You know, so even though these people were quarrymen rather than artists, they could talk to Keith and John and myself about their time spent working with stone as a material. And other people would just sort of like relate aspects of their lives, you know, around it as they talked. You know, some happy ones, some really, really tragic ones as well. It's like, but the fact that it was just being there within the community really sort of like allowed people to put it out there, what they were thinking of at the time, because of just folks there to talk to, and this interested them.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the sort of times list, like in my mind, I think in terms of, I think song came before speech. You know, we were like, as a species, we were singing before we were speaking. And I think in a similar way, you know, you've got art comes before commerce, becomes, I think art's got to come before religion on some levels. And, you know, because you need to build the altar to do the worship. So,
With the presence of cave paintings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, like our earliest sort of monuments are things like pictures of our hands and, well, prints of our hands and things like that. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And it does spark those conversations, you know, something that starts as an artwork or just a project, something that is just, you know, something that you start fiddling with and then it becomes something that you want to do something more with. And then it becomes like, I think, you know, once you get into that prospect of intent, then it becomes more artistic, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, because you go from molding the clay into like, okay, well, it's this. This is what I want it to be, and that's what it is, I think. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into the other questions then. So we'll start off with COVID. You've mentioned kind of the lockdown and kind of having your anniversary through lockdown. So take us back into going into lockdown. Were you, and what happened sort of, at what point did you lock down? Did that increase your workload? Did it just create panic stations? Did you lock down early? Were you prepared for it? Like, how did that go for you?
I guess I was kind of prepared for it. Mm-hmm. You know, and I was surprised that the country didn't go into lockdown the quicker than it did. Mm-hmm. I remember I was at a conference in Liverpool on 31st January of that year, of 2020, seeing the news from my mum and dad's television about what was going on because the hospital near them was being used to get those original 19 patients from Wuhan as a place to bring them to. And I remember thinking at the time, this doesn't look good. Having said that, you know, we still carried on until, you know, basement stuff, as well as, you know, Henry Moore Institute as well, until March of that year. And then we eventually I locked down. So the Lou Hazel will do an exhibition here, which had opened, I think, 2 or 3 weeks prior to us actually saying, right, we can't do this anymore. Her work was then locked in the basement for the best part of the next year. So technically she had the longest basement arts project exhibition ever. It was on for a year just because people could only see it for about 3 or 4 weeks. But it did then we did look at it and go, right, okay, so this is where we are right now. What do we do? So we did a sort of virtual tour online where we walked around using video cameras. And what I did, she was at home in Liverpool, and I interviewed her via Zoom. We then pieced the video together. So it was like a walk around of the exhibition with voiceovers by us as I asked her questions. Then we did like a lunchtime conversation, which is a regular thing that we do here, normally in person, where everybody gathers around this table and we just put it out to sort of 10 members of the public to get back to us and book a ticket for it. And we invite the artist along, and we have us book tickets with the public. We sit around this table, I make everybody dinner. We talk about the exhibition, and we go down, sort of have a tour of it downstairs. So we did one of them, but online. So if people, it'd be nice to think that people made their own lunches whilst they were sat at home with no access to the basement. But,
you could have done recipes for everyone.
Yeah.
Like, we're all going to eat the same thing. Here's what you need, and here's how to cook it.
Yeah. So, and we did that, and that seemed to work pretty well, actually. It was quite a good thing to do. And from that point, it was like, well, I can't sort of sit here and do nothing for however long this is going to last for now. And boy, I'm glad I didn't, because 2 years down the line. So I set up what I have this thing online called the Studio Journal. So for artists who are working on things downstairs, aside their project page on the website, which has all the information about the project downstairs, there's also the Studio Journal, which if they want to submit other things that they're working on at the time to show what they're doing, they can do it there, and I'll post it out. That's our kind of blog, really, is what they send to us for that, and things that I put out. So I did a special Studio Journal lockdown journal, which was about 50 50 episodes over, or posts over the course of a year and a half, but we really couldn't do anything together. And I just put it out there to people who never even worked with us before. So we had someone from America, we had someone from Germany, we had quite a few different sort of like people who have never, ever come across before. Just send me stuff and say, here's a thing for the journal. That's how every time something came out, I would just put it out as a blog post and sort of network it on various Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and that kind of thing. It seemed to be quite a popular thing to do. People enjoyed it and made a lot of comments about it. Some people tried to sell work online. I never know how well that works, but you know, they put price on things. Others, as usual, here didn't. They just wanted to do stuff. It didn't even have to be about lockdown or anything either. Sometimes people did sort of like diaries of their days, you know, in drawings, things like that. Other people submitted videos, music videos they'd done or things like that. So it's quite a wildly varied thing. And so I think what that time did for us was for us to sort of see, like, when you go online and start doing things, what works and what doesn't. And so now coming out of that, I'm very much embedded in the real world right now because, you know, we'd started Jacob's Ladder in 2019 with the intention that it might take perhaps a year and a half to do. 3 years later, we've only just finished it now. So it's been getting back out and get back on with those things that we sort of said goodbye to in 2019 for a while and doing that. But looking at it, I will be sort of looking at, okay, so doing online galleries worked in this way. So let's keep that. Let's work out how to use that. That's next. We don't need it, but it's a nice, useful adjunct to what we do here. And I think this comes to the heart of just how I feel about, you know, art as a thing, is that it's a thing that people do want to and need to be together to enjoy part of. You know, I mean, I can read books about art, I can look at it in books, I can go to galleries and look at it. But ultimately something happens when you're sort of in a room with someone, looking at something perhaps you've never thought about before, or that you don't even understand in that moment. And you then make a comment to someone, that's it. You can be chatting about all sorts of things for the next 2-3 hours and whatever. And that does regularly happen here. So, you know, it really is a sort of thing that you just can't put a price on that kind of interaction.
I mean, you kind of answered it, but has COVID changed the way that you're working? I suppose it's given you sort of new sets of skills and new openings and new connections, but it's, I don't see it. You know, you're looking to go back to how you were working, aren't you, really?
On the whole,
Yeah.
but I would say sort of like, you know, just keeping those things that I felt really worked and going, right, okay, we'll integrate this into how we work in the future. You know, so there will be elements that we've, you know, really learned from COVID about how you can adapt things, and also equally there's certain things that you can't adapt. You know, one of those things is the nature of just conversation around things of an art nature or societal or political nature even. I mean, the first 2 shows that we did after lockdown were first 3 shows were highly political for various reasons. You know, they address the nature of monuments, of protest, of environment. You know, these were things that quite obviously had been on people's mind. And so, in actual fact, those 3 projects had all begun before COVID, but developed over COVID into something that they weren't originally. The initial concepts were already there, but by the time we actually got to do them,
the world had changed.
Kind of centered these projects. They'd become much more sort of like focused on the sort of the problems of the here and now, as opposed to sort of like almost sort of like historical looking back on things.
Or sort of more abstract questions become kind of more immediate and more concrete of like, we're actually dealing with this, or, you know, or we have to think about this now.
Absolutely.
And we have to think about it in a different way because this is happening. Okay, so we'll do Brexit. So we'll start with the fun one. So I mean, this is something I've not mentioned on a recording for a bit, but other people have sort of said, and especially kind of nearer the time, that it's quite difficult to kind of separate Brexit and COVID because they were kind of happening at the same time. But I mean, from your experience, since we Brexited, have you noticed any change in how you're working? Has it affected your work? And has the change been, for the good, for the worse? Has there been a mixed bag? Like, how's Brexit affected your working?
I don't think Brexit has affected my working. I mean, the majority of what I do is based not just here in the UK, but is based here in East and South Leeds. The opportunities to go away and do things far afield are rare for the fact that, I just don't have time to sort of like do major projects in other countries. And also, because, the opportunities for that kind of thing, whilst they need to be there, I do want the main focus of what I do to be on this community here. And the rest of it is a sort of like an extension of what we do centrally. And weirdly, the things that we have done as projects in other countries have now been involved in countries where they're part of Europe anyway. We did, the 2 gallery shows in Jamestown in New York. So nothing different there about how things are now and how things were when we did that project. Equally, Stockholm, I guess recently actually Dortmund. But again, because I haven't been part of doing things before that point, I don't know what it was like. One thing I can say for sure, and this is not really to do with Brexit, but I guess is more to do with climate than anything, is how the way that we're kind of like persuaded to do things because of financial aspects is really not good environmentally. I mean, just looking now at the summer holidays at the expense of traveling by train anywhere, I was looking at the idea of going to Filey within the month. And in actual fact, it would be less for me to hire a car to get 5 of us out there than it would to get a train there and back. And equally, like going to do a project in Dortmund, because it was just at the end of COVID, I kind of like, and they asked me to do this project, and I was like, okay, yeah. And because of the way it was with COVID, it's like, do I really want to get on a plane? And I looked at it, and actually it turned out that despite Dortmund being our twin city of Leeds, there's no flights from Leeds Bradford to Dortmund. You'd have to go to Manchester for that. So there's a thing of like putting on loads of extra travel onto that. So I said to the people who were sort of like, funding me to go and do this, I sort of said it would be an opportunity to see if I could do the journey by train. And they agreed to that. It was quite expensive, should we say, to do that, because you think you can probably get a plane for less than that, can't you? It's like, yeah, I mean, at the time.
Financially, yeah.
Yeah.
The actual expense of the plane flight is way more than any money you're spending.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. And so it was like, that really sort of like brought it home to me. It's like, if I'd gone just about it, just doing the cheap way, as many people do, and that's because our finances keep us that way. We don't have the option to go, I don't mind spending this amount of money on that and just doing it to save the environment. Then it would have been, financially better, environmentally, part of this sort of continuing catastrophe that we see. And going overland on train to Dortmund was quite an experience. I hate flying, but anyway. And I was I have to admit, I was a little bit paranoid about flying at the time because of that whole thing that I hadn't had COVID. Ironically, I did then get it before I went away. Yeah. And so luckily it was over, and I was in that point going, well, I'm not going to get it again now. Yeah. If that's so I can probably justify that I can go now. Yeah. Because of that. So I was nervous about going for so many reasons, that being one of them. But in the end, it was sort of like, it was interesting things to then write about afterwards as well, with the blog that I wrote for Leeds City Council and stuff about travelling from Leeds to Dortmund, and talking about some of the travel aspects of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you get people who say, it's all about the travel, like the travel's the experience. It's like, they're not people who are used to traveling today, because travel's not an experience. If it's an experience, it's an awful one. But like, if you do things at a slower pace and at a slower rate, then you are like, the journey is part of that process, and it can be enjoyable because you're spending the time looking at the places that you're going through rather than just trying to speed past them and get to the destination. So we'll go straight on to climate change then. So in terms of the climate, are you able within your work, like what can you do within your work or within your work practices to kind of mitigate and adapt to climate change? Like, is it something that is, I mean, it sounds like it is something that's in the forefront of your mind anyway, but is it kind of designed, is it built into your work, into your own work? And I suppose with the day job with the Henry Moore Institute, like what is their kind of approach to it at the moment? Do they have anything climate related? I mean, obviously I would think they would, because the city has declared a climate emergency. So
yeah, they do. I couldn't go into detail about their policies on that. I know that there's various things that they're looking at, including things about sort of like the heating and insulation things, and solar panels, stuff like that, those kind of things. I don't know the ins and outs of their policies, but yes, they are doing stuff to tackle it. Here, it's kind of like, it's kind of baked into what we do by necessity, really.
Well, you are about the local, that's the key element, isn't it? So
yeah, we are. But I mean, everything that we do isn't local. I mean, even the exhibitions that we do here quite often are by people from outside of the city. So we are, bringing people in sometimes from other countries as well. But I would say that it's always done in such a way as, because we have no money to do things here, that we sort of take it upon ourselves, along with the artists. Go, right, what's the most financially easiest way to do this? It's booking train tickets to walk your work across the country a year in advance, just so that you can get it cheaply. And that's how we do it. Artists typically don't have cars as well, many of them. A lot of them are young as well. We have partly why they don't have cars. So there's that thing of, because I don't have a car, because the project doesn't have any money, we go, right, what is the cheapest yet most effective way to do what we want?
Yeah, it's like everything has to actually be thought about. There's no sort of immediate assumptions of, but they just bring their van, they load the van, and then they bring it into the cargo bay and they unload it and they put it in the gallery, and it's fine. That's how it all happens.
Yeah. Yeah. There's none of that here. I mean, I suppose I'd say the most sort of like, environmentally dubious thing that we've done is to create Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah.
The quarrying.
Big piece of stone that you dragged across. Yeah.
But in reality, for us, it was the transportation for that, which wasn't too bad, because it only came from literally down the road.
And it's not a temporary, it's a permanent fixture.
Yeah, forever. Yeah.
Beeston.
Reminds me of that quote from Nevermind the Buzzcocks, of someone saying about the man who invented the Manchester sound. This is what's that? The sound of breaking glass. Stolen car radios and running feet police sirens or whatever it was. Yeah, but that's the sound we all recognise.
I remember going to see, I think it was Jamiroquai at the MEN Manchester Evening News Arena.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd parked up, and just as we got out of the car, this van pulled up by this other van, and about 4 lads got out, broke into the back of this van, like whipped everything into the other van, and then drove off in the space of about like 2 minutes or whatever. And it was just like, what? That's supposed to happen. And then like, fool that I was, I like called the police. And then, I've got the police, they're like chasing me around Manchester Evening News Arena to try and get a witness statement. I'm like, I'm here to see a gig. Like, I want to be talking to you for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Then Jamiroquai comes on stage and says, well, it's an acoustic gig tonight.
All my kit's been nicked.
Yeah.
So we were on climate change, weren't we? I think we kind of covered that. So unless there's anything else that you want to kind of say about it.
Oh, yeah. It was just the Jacob's Ladder thing. We sort of established that was, that it's a permanent thing. Transport costs were low, therefore sort of emissions costs low and things like that. And also in terms of actually quarrying the material, because quarrying, when you look at like open cast quarrying in places like Italy, it's ruining the landscape and stuff. In actual fact, we took this from a scrap pile in the end. So it was a piece of rock that was useful to no one else and had already been quarried. We just found a way to make use of it. So, even with something like that, I don't see that sort of like, we did too much that could be seen as being environmentally catastrophic.
Well, yeah, you reclaimed and you upcycled.
Upcycled, that's a good word. Yeah, I like that.
Have you ever seen a film by Anya Spada called The Gleaners and I?
No.
It's really good. I watched it when I was doing my course, and it's so she'd made, like, she was part of the French New Wave.
Oh yeah.
And this is a documentary she's made when she's much older, and she's looking at sort of the history of gleaners in France, people that would go around and they would just pick up, the bits of fruit that were left at the end, or the misshapen vegetables, and that kind of thing, and like the whole culture of that, and how she sort of relates to that of just, it's like the whole sort of found objects art thing as well, of like, well, we take something and we'll, rather than ripping something out, we'll take something that's wasted and turn it into something. So I think that's, I think you'd enjoy the film. It's worth a watch.
I'll have to look at it. Yeah.
Social media. Is it something that you find beneficial? So from the point of view of the amount of time that you have to put into social media, if you do put any time into it, does it give a good return on investment? Do you feel that, like, those Facebook posts really do make a difference, or the website really does make a difference? Like, how do you see it?
So interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday with Kibble Bumstead, the artist who I was talking about that did the first show in our 10th anniversary show here yesterday, who sort of like said how he'd signed up for Vero, which is a new sort of like social media app. And there was a little bit of a sort of conversation going on Facebook post about Vero, about the sort of the use of all of these forms of social media, and are they just time thieves, or I'm not, wasn't necessarily sure about the sort of the validity of them. I mean, one of the things about social media, I think, is that people go to social media looking for validation in some way. There was a point where social media questions used to come up on funding sort of like reports, about your audience reach kind of thing. You tend not to find that now. In actual fact, some places say don't include your social media figures in things, which I think, both sides are a little bit sort of missing the point with that. Because I think so long as you don't place too much importance on social media, it can be of use to you. So long as you treat it as just as a thing of, keeping people informed about what you're doing, I think that's a really useful and good thing to do, because once again, it puts that sort of personal, it puts a face to something which doesn't have one originally. Yeah. I mean, in my discussion with this artist yesterday, he was saying about, the idea of, it's just to get together and, have face-to-face conversations like we always used to. That's the thing that he misses. And I totally agree with that. There's nothing that can be gained through social media that you wouldn't gain 10 times more if we were just able to get each other's company, I think, sometimes. But that said, as you point out, it's a little bit become like a work tool now. I think that's because a lot of things advertise at us through us. And that was kind of like what led me to Vero. And ultimately then I had several other people who said, oh, I found this, led Kimball to Vero, for instance, because it's got no adverts on it. So at the moment, it's sort of like its reach is particularly limited. But that said, it's quite a nice platform. You can look at images in a really nice format on it. It's quite easy to use. And I think, you know, again, they are just these things that, if like all of the others, your Twitters and your Instagrams, things like that, so long as you just treat them as things to have those kind of conversations with people about your work, it'll be really good for you. Just sort of don't expect sales through it, because again, unless you're a company, you're not going to get sales through it.
Or a shit hot marketer.
Or a genius marketer. Yes. Yeah, I'm sure people can. I'm not sure I could. But I think I like it and I don't. I mean, I go through periods where I try not to look at it at all, because especially when political things happen, because you know that every single thing is going to get subsumed by whatever the politics of the time is.
Yeah, and everything you're going to be shown is all basically machine picked to get the most extreme reaction out of you.
Yeah. So it becomes
so that you will engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an extremely unedifying way to work, because it constantly sort of promotes the lowest common denominator.
It's kind of like having your own personal Grima worm tongue sort of going in. You know, this has happened, and this, and these persons said this, and this person said this, and how do you feel about that? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And before you know it, you've got a massive argument on your hands with someone or something who may or may not be what they seem to be on the internet. You just don't know. We've done a couple of exhibitions here, which I think you could describe the content as being contentious. One a local issue, one a more sort of, well, actually no, three particular ones spring to mind. The other two being much more sort of international issues. And whenever you see these things sort of like being played out as discussions online, on social media, the argument is vitriolic. People behave in a way on social media that they wouldn't do face to face.
Yeah, it's the next extreme from being in a car, isn't it? It's like the next step up from road rage, that extra distance from the actual person. It's like, oh, well, you don't even exist as a person.
Yeah. But when we looked at these sort of like the openings that we had for these exhibitions, there was people from very, very different points of view that came to them. And in particular, one of these exhibitions, and as soon as people got in the room sort of like actually talking about it, no matter what side they came from, the arguments, the heat went out of it. And in actual fact, people then started to converge really quite, it was, definitely a sort of like a debate, of really firm debate.
Yeah, and get into the details, but not in a sort of, I'm going to kill you way.
The vitriol had gone out of it.
Yeah.
There was, the unpersonable personal attacks that they'd come up with social media just weren't there when you then translate it into a real life scenario. So one of these subjects, for instance, was a subject that was debated really loads online. And it was always such negative debating from all sides, really, because each would sort of like pick out the faults with each other, a very political thing to do, pick out the faults with each other's arguments rather than focusing on, where they might be thinking wrong themselves. Never that kind of debate. It's always one or the other. It's much more nuanced when you get people in the room together and then they start sort of like seeing, maybe it's through body language or something like that as well, that, oh, actually, I had cause of that. And then you see sort of like, I wouldn't say attitudes change, because I think, people quite often make up their minds and then stick with that forever. But you can certainly see them taking more consideration over the way people are describing the position that they come from when they're stood opposite them.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's totally different to deal with an actual person than, a virtual thing. I mean, it makes me think as well of, going back to like Mary Whitehouse and sort of when the she'd be on the TV or whatever and there'd be complaints about this, that and the other. And, a lot of the counter argument was kind of like, just turn it off, turn it over. There's 4 other channels. Why are you getting irate about this program? Just turn it over. And that's something that's disappeared out the window. But I think as well, because we want this when we go on the device, you kind of want, because it is anger and that's a boundary reaction. And I think there's that sort of, when you're not seeing things that are making you happy, you've seen like, in a scroll, you've seen 10 things which are there to trigger you. Yeah. Already before you actually engage with anything. So you're already like primed to be like, I'm going to shout at everybody.
Yeah.
So I think there's something in that, because you can't, you never hear from anyone of just turn it off. Don't look at it. Take it off your phone. Stop going on it if it's making you angry. Like, no, I must keep doing the thing that makes me angry.
Yeah.
It's a weird position. We'll move on to UBI. So universal basic income. If there was a universal basic income, would you still be doing what you're doing? If you would still be doing what you're doing, would you be doing it in the same way? Like, how would a universal basic income change things for you?
Yes, it would. Yes, I would still do my paid job, but I would do it less. I had a period where I was working 5 days as basement because I was getting some money from a charity to fund me to stay at home and do basement stuff. I didn't need to give up any work to get that funding, but I said, no, for the time that I've got it, I'm going to give up 4 or 5 days, about 3 days rather. I'm just going to work 2. I worked 5 days as basement and 2 at my Henry Moore job. After 3 years, the funding came to an end. Luckily, I got the job back, the one that I'd come out of at Henry Moore Institute, because somebody had left just at the point that I was coming out of that period. So I was able to go back.
Nice timing here.
Yeah. So I was extremely lucky at that point, which kind of like sort of shows the sort of the delicacy with which life hangs on a knife edge. That could very easily have tipped another way. And if I'd gone into another job, would it be the kind of job that allowed me to carry on doing this? As I said before, like before we started doing this interview, about the idea of being 50 odd and working in a highly paced job in a supermarket or whatever it might be. The idea that you would then have the presence of mind at the end of the day to then do something else is really unlikely. So I'm kind of like, grateful for the way that turned out. But I think that now, if the opportunity came, I still wouldn't entirely give up my job if I was able to live happily on the universal basic income. I still wouldn't give it up. I would like to do ideally 2 days again, because I think that somebody doing a job in the position that I do here, that I feel that I do for my community in the arts, needs to maintain a presence within other things as well. That's how you sort of like, you kind of trade positions. Me being there, here and there, gives people here access to there as well. It also gives people over there access to here. And so I think just that little crossover, I would keep it on solely for that. Because also I do just like working in public, in the public realm, as it were. I do it all the time here. I do it all the time then. I've done it all my life as well. Whether it be working in bookshops or supermarkets to whatever it is. I've done arts administrator 1 year for a few years at Arts of Trinity, receptionist at the Henry Moore Institute. I see them as they should all be beneficial to one another.
I mean, from the perspective of basement arts, I mean, I would assume that, if there's a universal basic income, people are not struggling so much on benefits in more, as they like to say, deprived areas, and also have more free time. So ideally, it should be cleaner and more visitors here. So so I mean, and through that, I mean, does it generate any revenue? Do you try and do you have anything to fund it? Is it self-funded at all, or is it just
we and the artists take on the costs of individual things most of the time? When we have big projects, we try and sometimes are successful at getting funding. We've recently had funding through the Henry Moore Foundation. we quite often have funding through Leeds Inspired. I'm just writing an Arts Council one at the moment. We've had Arts Council once in the past, and various other things like Leeds Art Fund, Leeds Phil and Leeds, places like that.
Do you do any crowdfunding or patrons?
We did crowdfunding to get to America. That we did that.
Yeah.
But again, I never knew how I felt about that at the time. I think having spoken to some of the people who donated in that time, I feel better about it now than I did at the time. Because one of the things that I've always sort of really tried to do is keep everything free to everybody who comes here, whether it's the artists or visitors, that it's always free to them. So the idea of thinking, we'll donate to this. But then people said to me afterwards, well, we didn't mind donating because we wanted to see it be successful.
Yeah, and it's a donation, it's completely voluntary. So for them to, I mean, sometimes there is the kind of shaking jar, like, here's donate to me.
Well, this is it. This is like, these companies that, when you go to their checkouts and they go, will you round up to £1 when you've just spent like 32p or something?
Do you want to spend a bit more? It's for charity.
Yeah.
Like,
and then they go,
I'm a bad person if I don't then, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they go, look what we donated to charity this year. It's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
You got everybody else. And they said, you gave it. It doesn't work like that. So I'd always viewed it a little bit like that, I think. But then from having those kind of conversations with people, I was like, well, actually, no, because they genuinely say to me, the one thing that I hope doesn't happen is that people who don't have money, oh, yes, I want it to happen. And put it in. That I hope doesn't happen.
But, they should be able to donate as well, is the thing. It's like, donations shouldn't be exclusionary either. It shouldn't be like, well, I haven't got much, but, every penny helps. It's like, well, it's that whole thing of, well, the proportion of my donation is way bigger than the proportion of their donation because they can afford it and I can't. So we'll go to the change question. So I suppose it's similar to UBI in a way. But the question is, so if you could change any three things, and I would say consider this for both roles, any three things about your work, so you can be as wild or as conservative as you want with this. They can be realistic or unrealistic, or it could be just everything's perfect. What three things would you change about your work if you could?
Oh, you've stuck me with that one. I mean, this is it. I think I'm not sure, apart from the idea of working less at one thing to allow me to work within the community more. I don't think I would change things.
Do you think you've got the right work-life balance then?
No, not at all. Because,
is it biased more towards the paid work than sort of the work that you want to be doing, or?
It's biased towards the paid work because the paid work I have to do to
fund everything else,
funding everything else, to keep roof over my head, to keep children's mouths, etc. I hate money. If we there's something I'd change, and I'll go wildly up, wildly out there with this one and say I'd get rid of money. If we could find a way of doing anything that didn't involve money at all, I would do it. It would make me happy to not have to consider money as a thing. That's a question thrown up by Bill Drummond when him and the KLF spent £1 million on the Scottish Island. In his appearance on that show afterwards, the Irish chat show thing, and his sort of thinks about, well, because I've earned that £1 million, were there any less apples grown on trees? Were there less of that happen? The answer is no, but as long as the money exists, and they say, well, you could have given it to charity. But once they've used that, what do they need? They then need more money. And this is the kind of like the wage inflation spiral that they're kind of talking about now. It doesn't matter how much you do things, because of the presence of money within the system. You do one thing to that over there will increase over there, and you're always getting less there, more there, more there, less there. And it just keeps on going. At the moment, there is no answer to a capitalist system. And, that's what we have to work with. And until someone can come up with an option, if people say, well, I'm anti-capitalist or whatever, or, would I consider myself anti-capitalist? I work a lot for nothing, and, I don't like systems of structure and things like that. But I would only say the only point I would be anti-capitalist is if we could sort of get to a point where there was a workable alternative that we get. Right now is a point that we can change. Unfortunately, it's sort of it's not showing that way at the moment, but I keep optimistic. Ultimately, sort of like money will never be my goal. But the ability to do things, I would like more. I'd like a nicer house. I'd like, I'd like to be able to get away on holiday, but I can't do that. Never really been able to do that. So now is no different to the past, really. But who knows? I mean, if, we had an alternative option, those things might be possible. Once you see an end to poverty, you can actually start to imagine, by which I mean real poverty. I mean, I'm not in real poverty. I've got a house. I can keep the food coming and stuff. But that's precarious still. But, as I've, whilst I've been working on these projects outdoors here and the kind of things that you see, it's like, this, so long as this kind of thing continues, then there's really a long way before you can even start to think positively about those kind of systems that we would change. So, I guess, get rid of money. That would be my ideal change. Probably the only one I would have. I like projects.
What about a bigger space? An exhibition space?
Nice, yeah.
I mean,
again, not essential though.
No, but I mean, say you won the lottery and you've got, you're like, okay, well, this place is a known quantity. I mean, would you ever sort of like do the whole house? So it all became, like an art space.
That'd be great. To run it as a project with living studios, things like that. I'd love to do something like that, I suppose. Yeah.
But then it kind of, it potentially spoils it, doesn't it, when you've got the money there? Because money is kind of, in a lot of ways, it's anti-creative. Because it's just like, well, look in the phone book and find the guy that does that or the thing that does that. Like, go and, just buy something rather than, okay, well, we've got this and we've got this. What can we do with these things? Like, what? We have nothing else. We just got these. What can we do?
We're going back to the removal of money as a system here. It's been, the ideal thing that you could do is to remove money from the process because it's that and a change thing. I always think that if I did sort of do a bigger space, have access to a bigger space, that people would probably just find it's like a bigger version of our crusty, decaying basement. I don't think it'd ever go down the white wall route because it's like, already exists.
What do you think about, I mean, this is just for my own interest, the sort of divergent tangent, but the sort of like what do I want to use here? Like a permanence of art. Like should it be should it be ephemeral? Should it be something that is that, like a castle of sand of like, should it fade away? Should it last forever? Or is that related to the piece of how that should work? I mean, because obviously you've had a lot of work here over the years and you could have spent all the time, like, relentlessly photographing everything to ultimately have this huge curated or coffee table book of, the basement art project in Leeds from such and such to such and such. It was such a time and look at these glossy images. Like, but that doesn't seem to be what you're doing. It seems to be like, oh, what's an interesting thing? Let's have an interesting thing, have that go on. And then what's another interesting thing? So there seems to be this turnover of like, things changing and things being different. What's your sort of thoughts and feelings on that?
We have done a couple of books over the years. One of them's up there where we've gone down the glossy image route and, essays about the exhibitions of me. We do that for every exhibition on the internet anyway. I mean, for every exhibition we've done over the 11 years, there's documentation, words and pictures online about it. So we do document everything quite sort of, to quite a degree.
Do you curate that at all though? Is that sort of, does it just kind of happen or like, have you got it quite carefully curated?
I tend to write about pretty much every exhibition. I will write a piece on everything that we do. The studio journal online allows the artist to write their sort of interpretations of things and talk about things that they want to. So both go on there. But then equally, I've sort of like quite often we've managed to get writers in to write about things as well. So that we'll quite regularly get sort of like viewpoints from other artists, other curators, other writers about what it is that we're doing. So I think all of those approaches, that we do on a regular basis. I had this sort of like question with one artist that worked here one year, Pippa Eason. Her project downstairs sort of like involved lots of these sort of like objects that were made with gold chains and ropes and things bundled together, and then ultimately about 5.5 kilograms of glitter thrown everywhere, some golden pig glitter, which a lot of it's still down there now. You can see it in the sort of hanging in cobwebs in corners and things, traces of this. And that, again, that's one of the other things about downstairs, is that looking around the walls, I know exactly what remnants are there from which artists. So there is a bit of a sort of documentation going on the walls as well. The bits that we didn't get rid of, because I always say to people, is there anything from past exhibitions, the marks on walls or anything that you'd like me to get rid of? Don't get anyway. And always, then I leave it, I'll work around it. And sometimes you get down there and you go, oh, they've worked with it. And suddenly it's become part of their own work, where they brought what was already there into what they've done. This exhibition that's currently on at the moment by Sharon McDonald, that's a prime example of that. She's really used sort of things down there to confuse people as to what they're looking at. So somebody going, I recognise that from Simon and Ursula's exhibition, and it's still here on the floor in this one. What's going on? And lots of objects they'd never seen before because they came from somewhere else that Sharon has brought along and added to it. So is this an artwork, or is this just object? Then there's the objects themselves, which are these sort of paintings where she's literally sort of like recreated a section of the wall, then pulled the painting over the section of wall itself. There's some frame pieces that, you look and go, that's a frame piece, I know that's a work. But then there's certain works that are almost hidden. They're not very major, main sections of the wall. But, they look like they're hiding away from you because they match the wall behind them. So in that respect, the walls downstairs and the floors and the cobwebs are a documentation of sorts as well. But I remember having this conversation with Pippa about her work and saying, so every time you make something, once you've exhibited it, your thing then is to take it back to the studio and start taking it apart and making new stuff out of it. Now that comes from a financial thing. Well, the best way to do it is to reuse what I've got. It's cheaper. Probably environmentally, it's less damaging as well, actually. But I said that creates a problem, doesn't it, then, about how your work is seen in history. It only becomes a photograph. And the fact that we've got your photographs of your work on the website is the only record of that ever having happened. And so I said to her, so what would make you go, that piece of work is finished and go nowhere else? She was like, don't know. I said, so if we said, we'll buy it from you, would you go, well, okay, I'll stop that. You can have that. So we bought it off her. I hope we gave her a good price for it, because we, like a lot of artists here, were like, how do you price this kind of stuff? That in itself is very difficult. But, she was like, oh, okay then. I said, all right, we'll buy it off you then. And she went, okay. So I paid her and that was it. It's like, so that's the one item that exists from that exhibition. Nothing else does anymore. So, documenting things now, I think we're in a difficult period because we can look back on Da Vinci and go, it has to be kept under really dark lights and temperature and heat control and humidity controlled rooms to look at this thing. But it is kind of, not all of it, but some of it, amazing to look back and go, wow, that is a sense of our history there. And that, how will we look at this point in our history and go, the majority of what we did doesn't exist anymore. It looks like a blip in history where it's missing. So I don't know. I mean, I like the fact that historical stuff exists, and I think it's important that it does. I think we also need to sort of like address how we store it and how we deal with it now in the present as well, where work is ephemeral, as you say.
It's making me think of sort of stores of like museums and art galleries and stuff as being like, they're kind of their version of sheds and attics. It's just like, I know I've got something in there. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in there. It's piled around. At some point, I'm going to have to go in and sort it out.
Yeah.
And then just huge warehouses that are basically that.
Well, Francis Bacon's Studios was like an example of that, where, it was left when he died, how it was. It was an absolute mess. And it was like, just rubbish everywhere, stacked up in all the corners. Barely room to walk around in. And in the end, what they did was they built a gallery in Ireland, the dimensions of his room, and then replaced it all with a map of where everything was, placed all the objects so they could then sort of like, get rid of this building and put blue plaque on it and say Francis Bacon Studios here, and transferred the whole thing to this gallery in Ireland. So now how his gallery was at the moment he died, how his studio was the moment he died, is now a gallery. Exists now exactly the same the art itself. I mean, there was a lot of things about Francis Bacon's sort of like career that make people go, really? But, that kind of like really adds up, some of those sort of points, the sort of the honesty of it all, or the lack of honesty in it. Am I looking at artwork? Am I looking at a studio? Studio as an artwork? What is this exactly? Documentation of performance even?
Yeah. It's kind of like sort of going, well, was Duchamp the sort of artist there, or was it the gallery owner that went, oh yeah, you can do that? It's art because it's in a gallery. Well, only if the gallery owner lets you put it in the gallery.
Yeah.
So is it the artist that decides or the gallery owner? No. Okay, so I've basically gone through most of my questions there. Over to you, basically, if there's anything that you want to kind of discuss or talk about that we haven't touched upon. If there isn't, then I suppose if you know your socials, it would probably be good to get you saying them on the recording. But yeah, over to you.
Okay. Well, I guess our website is basementarts.com, and you can sign up to a mailing list there as well. There's option for you to do that, and every time we do an exhibition or some kind of event here, we'll always sort of invite people to what we do. We're just Basement Arts Project on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think I go under my own name, Bruce Davies, weirdly on Pinterest, but I think it's brackets Basement Arts Project. Don't know why I did that. And I've just got this new Vero thing as well, which is quite an interesting little thing to try.
Have you got any sort of exciting exhibitions coming up? Anything? Or obviously you've got one at the moment. So yeah, you've mentioned that, and maybe sort of, do you know how much of your program you've got so far?
Well, we're only just really kind of getting towards the end of our sort of 2019 program. All of the exhibitions we've done this year are the ones that we've held over.
That were planned, yeah.
We're kind of getting to the end of that now. We've got one more from that sort of that pot of people, a guy called Edward Mortimer, who does a lot with sort of ceramic heads and strange insect creatures and things like that. It's very theatrical. There's a massive Boris Karloff Frankenstein head as part of it.
Nice.
It's going to be, the exhibition is going to be called Crazy Eddie's Bargain Basement. And it's a sculptural show, so it's going to go right over the winter. We're going to put it in November, a really appropriate time for such a theatrically morbid exhibition until next February. And then I'm sort of talking with a few people at the moment for next year. Chloe Harris, who is a sort of printmaker, who is now based in Manchester, I think, but was based in Leeds for a year or two during the pandemic. She was doing a project about Amazon warehouses, which she was working in as a key worker. So hopefully we can find a way to put some stuff of Amazon work in downstairs. We're also looking at maybe a project for her with Leeds 2023. We're hoping to do a mural project, which will involve her and a couple of other people. But that's all sort of like very much in just the initial planning thoughts to planning stage at the moment. Jacob's Ladder, which we've finished, there is still one final part of that left, and it's called Nature of Balance. It's a second sculpture, and it's to go over at the traffic lights at Tunstall Road. So it's only about 100 yards from Jacob's Ladder across the road, which will be the last of our 2019 On the Corner projects, which we started with the YSI, New York Sculpture International. And then we've got another couple of, one's a group and one's an individual artist who I'm sort of talking with at the moment to try and bring their work here next year. Both of whom are from Leeds.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, have you had a pretty good showing of Leeds artists over?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Predominantly Leeds artists.
Yeah.
You know, but we also have had people from Italy, France, all over this country. My mind's got a complete blank now.
No, that's fair enough. I'm going to wind it up now anyway. So, yes, thank you very much for doing this, Bruce.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, I will press stop. Thank you again to Bruce for being my guest. Thanks again to all my guests. And thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. And of course, most of all, thank you to you, my dear listener. Come back on Friday to hear me speak to Ron Wiener. You can follow this show on Twitter at Working Hours 3 and on Instagram at Working Hours Pod Leeds. Use the hashtag Working Hours Pod Leeds to stay up to date on when new episodes are being released, to DM me with your questions, or most importantly, to get in touch if you'd like to be my guest on this show. Please do chuck in anything you can to help the show grow. Go to ko-fi.com/working hours and join me there for £1 a month, or you can make a one-off donation of whatever amount. You can also go to patreon.com/working hours pod to support Working Hours, again from as little as £1 a month. Why not be super awesome and join both? Do something new and something different. Remember to like, share, follow and subscribe to Working Hours. That's me. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Please like Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/Western_Studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Leeds, are you considering taking the plunge into podcasts or audio content? Then think Western Studios for support, advice and guidance on getting it made. At Western Studios, you work with a real-life learner who is actually in Leeds. Not a piece of software, not a course of articles or a series of live chats and video courses, but me, a person in physical place-based reality. If you want to work with me to make your podcast or any digital audio content in Leeds, whether it's for your own cause, your publicity campaigns, to promote your products, increase your sales, or just to create your own passion projects, then get in touch with me, Western Studios, now. Don't wade through vapid articles and videos and podcasts about how to make podcasts by disembodied virtual people on the web. Get on with making your podcast now, and then when it gets hard and expensive and it all goes wrong, which it will, then call Western Studios to make your podcast with you or even for you. Western Studios will take on your podcast's boring, time-consuming and painful admin, recording, editing, transcription, whatever. Tell me about your podcasting pain points and I can make it all better for you. I feel your pain. For a charge, I will share it. Remember, podcast work is work. Leeds businesses, Leeds campaigns, Leeds brands. Got an inkling that you'd like a podcast but don't know where to start? Contact Western Studios at makemypodcast@western-studios.com and we'll start making your podcast straight away. The first hour of arranged consultation and pre-production time is free. £25 an hour after that for editing, recording, production. I can also arrange hefty discounts for the right project. So tell me your idea and your budget and I'll tell you what I can do for you. What do you have to lose? Time. That's what. Time is running out. The best time to make a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. Writers in Yorkshire, what are you doing with your lives? Hopefully you're writing. Well, I know there are listeners out there who want to hear great original writing performed as audio content that is about and for and has been made in Leeds. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them loiners what wants it. Help me make your old screenplays, unpublished novels, unperformed plays, stories, poems, and performances, whatever you got, baby, and make it as podcast content. Is your work arty, salacious, pulpy, strange? Good. Is it unfinished? Good. I can help you with that too. I can work with you to find actors, musicians, and voiceover artists and quickly realize your projects. I get practice making the shows and you get a finished, performed and published version of your writing. Save yourself the hassle and the headache of making your podcasts on your own by working with me instead.